On the evening of January 6, 1982, the mountain town of Breckenridge was preparing for challenging weather. A blizzard was coming. In this part of Colorado, freezing temperatures and heavy snowfalls are commonplace. It was the snow that brought thousands of winter sports enthusiasts and mountain holiday lovers here every year. Today, it continues to be a major ski resort. That evening, as the bad weather played out in full, the local police sheriff, who had just taken off in a plane from nearby Denver, spotted someone flashing their headlights in the mountains at regular intervals. 3 short flashes, 3 long flashes, then 3 short flashes again. The SOS signal. Someone is in trouble in the mountains. The sheriff gave the pilots this information and they relayed the radio message with the coordinates to dispatchers on the ground. The chief of the fire department set out towards the spot. To get there, he had to ascend the mountain pass outside of town. The rescuer's name was Dave Montoya, and he did indeed locate a man named Allan Lee Philips at the specified location. His vehicle was stuck in a snowdrift, and if it were not for Dave, the man would have frozen to death within a few hours. The weather that day was very severe, with temperatures dropping below -4 degrees Fahrenheit, and at high altitudes it could have been as low as -31. Heavy snow and wind made it impossible for Allan to get to the nearby ski slopes, although he had attempted this. The only hope for rescue were his headlights and the SOS signal. His rescue seemed to be a miracle. Phillips's salvation by the hand of the brave fire chief was reported in all the local papers and on TV. Everyone was overjoyed at the news and happy for the young man. An SOS signal seen from an airplane. Miraculous indeed. In one of the newspapers, the story stood next to the criminal news. The section for that day included a report of a young woman's body that had been found, and that is what we'll be focusing on today. On January 6th, the day of heavy snowfall, the 29-year-old Bobbie Jo Oberholtzer, resident of the town of Alma, located 25 kilometers or 16 miles from Breckenridge, went to work in Breckenridge as usual. She left the house at about 7:15 a.m. and caught a ride. This was common practice for the residents of the ski resort of Breckenridge and other similar towns like Alma. Firstly, because the towns were fairly safe and small, and secondly, because the employees of the hotels, bars, and restaurants and the few businesses in Breckenridge that hitched rides mostly knew each other and had no trouble giving a ride to or from town. It was even considered bad manners not to offer a lift if while driving you saw a person walking along the road. After work, Bobbie Jo decided to go to the local pub with 2 friends of hers. She had a good reason for that. She had just been promoted from secretary to office manager. She worked for a real estate company and was married to Jeff Oberholtzer, who ran an appliance repair business. The couple had been married for 5 years and had recently moved to Alma. The mountains had beckoned them. Jeff considered himself a true hippie and dreamed of living close to nature. Bobbie Jo had a daughter from a previous marriage. That evening, Jeff got a phone call from Bobbie Jo at about 6:20 p.m. telling him the good news and that she was going to celebrate the promotion at a bar with her colleagues. Jeff offered to meet her, but Bobbie Jo decided not to bother her husband that night. She was not planning on staying out late, and her colleagues would give her a lift. Shortly after they had spoken, Jeff's friend Joe Urban stopped by. At this time, Jeff was outside clearing the yard from the snow that continued piling up. The friends discussed going to the gas station and trying to pawn Joe's watch to buy fuel and motor oil. Apparently, money was tight at the time. In the end, Jeff paid for the gas and 6 beers, and they went home. They drank beer, chatted, and watched TV. At about 8 p.m., Joe left his friend's house, and Jeff continued watching TV, but was beginning to worry. Why hadn't Bobbie Jo called again? He dozed off in the living room for a while. Suddenly, he woke up to the sound of an ambulance driving by. It was midnight. Bobbie Jo still hadn't returned. I made dinner and waited for her to come home. I woke up around midnight and Bobbie Jo wasn't home yet. I thought maybe she'd had a little too much to drink and lost track of time. only she never came home and I knew something was wrong. Jeff hastily drove to Breckenridge to look for Bobbie Jo. At around 2:45 a.m., he arrived at the home of Bobbie Jo's friend, Karen McCassin, and she told him that Bobbie Jo had left the bar at around 7:30 p.m. She left alone because her co-workers decided to stay late at the bar, and she said she would catch a ride. At about 7:45 p.m., Bobbie Jo was seen in the parking lot at a convenience store on the outskirts of town. That was the place where locals usually tried hitching a ride. A truck driver she knew offered to give her a ride, but Bobbie Jo refused. He could only take her about 5 miles or 8 kilometers out of town, and then their paths diverged. Whereas Bobbie Jo didn't want to get stuck in the freezing cold in the oncoming blizzard somewhere on the highway. That was the last time anyone saw her alive. The worried husband drove to the office where his wife worked. Maybe she had decided to spend the night here, but it was dark and empty. When Jeff reported Bobbie Jo's disappearance to the police, it was about 3:30 in the morning. They told him it was too early to file a missing person report. After all, his spouse is an adult and might not simply want to come home. Perhaps the couple had had a fight that Jeff wouldn't mention. Finally, Jeff went home determined to wait for Bobbie Jo there. In the back of his mind, he hoped that his wife had already returned and was about to tell him of her misadventures. But she was still not home. The next morning, Jeff received disturbing news. A farmer who lived 30 miles or 48 kilometers from Breckenridge found Bobbie Jo's driver's license next to his house. Donald Hamilton called the Oberholtzer's household at around 8 a.m., and Jeff picked up the phone. Upon learning of the discovery, Jeff and 2 of his friends went to get the document. Along the way, they made another disturbing discovery. I noticed a blue spot in the snow. Her backpack was blue, so we stopped. Yes, while driving down the highway, Jeff noticed something blue on the left side of the road in a drift behind a fence. It was indeed his wife's backpack. Someone had probably thrown it out of the window of a passing car. Along with the backpack, one of Bobbie Jo's gloves, a blood-stained tissue, and a cigarette butt were also found in the snowy field. Jeff's friends helped him organize a search along with locals, and some of those who joined the search even brought skis to get to the places that were the hardest to reach. The men went looking for Bobbie Jo and the snow-covered Hoosier Pass between Breckenridge and Alma. Why did the men decide to go there in the first place? Because they found the backpack not far from State Highway 9, and this prompted them to explore every inch of the road's surroundings. Another reason for driving to the pass was so that their search would continue downhill, which would be easier than going up the mountain. There was also a better view of the forest from above, so if Bobbie Jo was there was a better chance of seeing her. The ski party had only gone 100 yards before they made the horrible discovery. At 4 p.m., Bobbie Jo Oberholtzer's body was found near a road sign, 27 feet or 9 meters south of the parking lot and 18 feet or 6 meters off Highway 9. So she was found more than 24 kilometers from where her backpack was discovered. At the time, Jeff was back at the farm. The search party examined Bobbie Jo, being careful not to disturb the snow cover or touch the body. There were footprints in the snow. They led to Bobbie Jo, so they were her own. There were zip ties on one of her wrists. Police soon arrived on the scene. They speculated that Bobbie Jo had been kidnapped and tied up, but managed to break free, whereupon she was shot at close range in the chest. But the wound was not fatal, so she was able to escape to the woods, where she soon died of hypothermia and blood loss. They also examined the area around her, and that's when they discovered something strange. A single orange booty sock on the nearby parking lot. They also found a large brass key ring with a hook that Jeff had made for Bobbie Jo so she could use it if she ever needed to defend herself. The autopsy revealed that she had not been sexually assaulted. From the outset, police were suspicious of Bobbie Jo's husband, Jeff Oberholtzer, but he insisted he didn't know what had happened. In a conversation with the police, he said that he loved his wife and that they had discussed the idea of becoming parents days before the incident. They had also voiced it to close friends at a New Year's Eve party. However, it soon became clear that the relationship between the spouses was not ideal. According to acquaintances, they quarreled and also had money problems. Could it have been a domestic assault? Jeff was unable to produce a key witness for the police. His friend Joe Urban, who was supposed to corroborate his alibi, could not be found anywhere, raising suspicions that he might have moved away and was lying low. Besides, even with him, Jeff's alibi would have been quite flimsy. John had left his place fairly early that night, so Jeff might have had time to go out and deal with his wife. Police suspicions were heightened when, on July 3rd, 1982, a boy fishing in Sacramento Creek, about 20 miles south of Breckenridge, stumbled upon the body of another woman. She was fully clothed, lying face down in the water. Jeff Oberholtzer's business card was found in her purse, but that wasn't the most important thing. She was found wearing an orange booty sock. Her belongings were discovered to the north of where Bobbie Jo's body was found in January. The existence of a connection between this woman and Bobbie Jo was additionally indicated by the fact that she had also been shot. There was a shot wound on her back, presumably from a .38 caliber bullet, though the bullet and shell casing were not found. Who was this woman? The water in the river was cold enough to preserve her appearance, and a list of missing women revealed that her name was Annette Schnee. To the investigators' great astonishment, when they looked at the date of Annette's disappearance, they discovered that she went missing on January 6th, the same day as Bobbie Jo did, only a few hours earlier to be precise. Annette worked at the Holiday Inn in the small town of Frisco, north of Breckenridge. On January 8th, the day after Bobbie Jo Oberholtzer's body was discovered, a co-worker of 21-year-old Schnee reported her missing. She was worried that Annette had already missed 2 shifts at work, which wasn't like her at all. Cindy French, Annette's sister, remembered well the day her mother received the disturbing news back in Iowa.
I heard her on the phone. I heard her start to cry. And I said, "What's wrong?" And she said, "Annette is missing."
Annette's older sister, Karen Reeson, was also notified of Annette's disappearance. She immediately went to Colorado. A year earlier, Annette had left her home in Sioux City, Iowa, and moved to Colorado, where she was doing well working as a housekeeper by day and cocktail waitress by night at the Flipside bar. Her new home was only 5 miles away from Breckenridge. Gradually, as they interviewed witnesses, the detectives learned that Annette was last seen in Breckenridge at around 4:30 p.m. on January 6th. She hadn't been feeling well that day and asked to leave work early to see a doctor in Frisco. After getting a prescription, she went to the pharmacy in Breckenridge, presumably having hitched a ride, which is something she did often. And that was one of the reasons the investigators suspected the 2 cases might be connected. A pharmacy employee was also interviewed. She had seen Annette talking to an unknown, suspicious-looking woman. Witnesses believed Annette was acquainted with her. The woman asked to buy her some cigarettes, and Annette paid for them. This was most likely the last time Annette was seen alive. Annette was supposed to work at the bar that night, but she never showed up. Her uniform remained at home, folded on the bed. Annette was a responsible person, so everyone was surprised that she would skip work without warning. While examining Annette, the investigators noted that the shot had been fired at an angle. She may have been kneeling or running downhill. Although there was no clear evidence for this, the police still assumed that she had been sexually assaulted, an inference made from her clothing. The zipper on her blue jeans was broken, and it looked like her shoes had been put back on her when she was already dead. They asked her mother about the orange socks Annette was wearing, and she explained, holding back tears, that she had given them to her for Christmas. The second sock was found near Bobbie Jo's body, and an examination concluded that the socks were indeed identical. What did this mean? Did the perpetrator want to leave his mark in this fashion or give the police a clue? Or was it a total coincidence? Were the women in the car together? What was the motive? There were a lot of questions. The investigators presumed that Annette died first. The attacker had agreed to give her a ride and drove about 20 miles south of Breckenridge. He probably drove Annette to a cul-de-sac and raped her there. As to what happened next, Richard Eaton, county sheriff, suggests the following. While she was getting dressed, she apparently found one long sock, put it on, and couldn't find the second long sock. She then put an orange bootie on her other foot and her boots on. She apparently escaped and while running away was shot in the back. The police version of what happened to Bobbie Jo was that the perpetrator probably returned to Breckenridge after killing Annette and found a second victim. He then took Bobbie Jo to the side of the pass, 10 miles south of Breckenridge, to a scenic lookout where he may have attempted to tie her up and rape her. When Bobbie Jo broke free and ran out of the car, the orange sock fell out. But the perpetrator didn't notice it. He chased the fleeing Bobbie Jo and shot her twice. Jeff Oberholtzer believed his wife knew the assailant. My wife wouldn't get in a car with a couple of strangers. She knew she could call me if she wanted to. I think she knew some of them. That's why she got in the car. They just promised her a ride home. At the time, a lot of people were alarmed by this wording of his. Why did Jeff think there was more than one perpetrator? As he told himself, it was because Bobbie Jo had her own rules for hitchhiking. In particular, she never got into a car with a male driver she didn't know. She only broke that rule if there was another woman already in the car. Maybe that fateful night she decided to break her rule because it was late and cold. Imagine being outside in a blizzard with temperatures of under -4 degrees Fahrenheit. And what about the suspicion that fell on Jeff? Former CBI agent Jim Hartke had been investigating the case for some time. He asked Jeff how his business card ended up in Annette's wallet. When I first asked Jeff if he knew Annette Schnee, he denied it. A few days later, when he saw her picture in the paper, he came up to me and said he knew Annette and had given her a business card. Jeff claimed that on a November afternoon back in 1981, he gave Annette a ride home, a common occurrence. In conversation, he mentioned that he worked in construction. She apparently inquired about something to do with his work, and that's when he gave her his card. How else could it have gotten there? Did he shoot her and then put the card in her wallet? Nonetheless, this explanation didn't sound very convincing, especially considering that Jeff, when he learned of Annette's disappearance, went to the police and said he knew when and where she would be found. He had a premonition, a vision, and a dream. He claimed that she would be found on the 4th of July, 4 miles from his home, and she was found, as we remember, on July 3rd, 7 miles away. What an eerily accurate premonition. Another weird aspect of the case was a black and white photo found in Annette's backpack depicting a man nobody could recognize. It wasn't her boyfriend or her father in his youth or anyone she knew in town. Just some unknown man. He looked like a military man, but other than that, nothing was known about him. So the only thing that remained was speculation. Perhaps he was an acquaintance of hers from another city, a tourist who came to ski, a pen pal. Word spread through town about the case. Some claimed that Jeff had not been faithful to Bobbie Jo, that he had had mistresses. This was confirmed by some members of Bobbie Jo's family who said that the couple's marriage was falling apart. For example, Bobbie Jo went alone to her sister's wedding in the summer of 1982 in Wisconsin. It is also worth noting that no one could confirm or deny what Jeff was doing before Bobbie Jo called him, in the hours that Annette was being attacked, and she was clearly the first. That said, Jeff was overly cooperative with the police. Perhaps only the behavior of a man who had lost his wife and wanted to get to the truth. And we've already mentioned the fact that it was impossible to verify Jeff's alibi after his wife's phone call. His friend, John Urban, had disappeared and only surfaced 8 years later in December 1990 in Vermont. Sheriff Eaton called the man in for an interview. He stated that he was at Jeff's house that night. However, the time he indicated did not match the time Jeff gave us. What on earth was going on here? The police had other suspects, including convicted murderer Tracy Petrocelli, who was staying at the hotel where Annette worked, and infamous serial killer Henry Lee Lucas. However, none of their DNA samples matched the blood found at the crime scene. At the time, such technology was poorly developed, and they could only determine the blood type and compare it with that of the suspect. No match was found here, but the blood on the glove and the napkin matched Bobbie Jo's blood type, so the investigators concluded that it was her blood. It wasn't until the early aughts that advances in technology showed that even though the blood type did match, the blood couldn't have been Bobbie Jo's. The test showed that the DNA was male. So since the blood type didn't match Bobbie Jo's husband's samples, but the blood was male, he certainly had nothing to do with it. What a relief for Jeff, who had lived under suspicion for 20 years. Finally, he was cleared, but the case remained unsolved. The detectives thought it could only have been done by someone local, someone who knew the neighborhood well and could navigate, or someone the women themselves might have known. Or perhaps he used another woman in the car as bait. Years went by, even decades. DNA technology continued to advance, and finally in 2021, there was a breakthrough. The Schnee family hired Detective Charlie McCormick, who worked on the case for years, charging the family only $1 a year for his work, so important was the case to him. At some point, he learned of United Data Connect, a company specializing in DNA work. United Data Connect were able to extract DNA from some of the evidence and cross-check it in their database. They found matches with samples from several hundred men, then finally narrowed it down to 2 men who were brothers, and only one of them lived in Colorado. They were very close to figuring out the case. Sergeant Kippel contacted one of these brothers, Bruce Philips, and he revealed that he had never lived in Colorado, unlike his brother Allan Lee Philips. They were not in touch. By this time, Allan was 69 years old. He had been married 3 times and had 2 stepchildren and a daughter. Kippel discovered that Allan Lee Philips had been convicted of assault and theft in 1973 and served a 6-month prison sentence. She was alarmed by this, but neither the prosecutor's office nor the court had any record of him. Undaunted, Kippel went to the sheriff's office archives. There, she was told that there had been a fire in the office and many files had been destroyed. But she did manage to find the right file in the last of the surviving drawers. The police report on the incident included a photograph of 22-year-old Philips and his signed confession. In that confession, Philips claimed that he drove a woman in Breckenridge and attacked her outside an empty house. He took a rock and struck her several times. The woman managed to convince Philips to let her go and later reported the incident to police. Philips served 6 months in jail for the crime. Kippel also discovered that Phillips's name had appeared in a double murder case in 2005. However, too much time had passed to confirm his involvement, and the man was released. The investigators decided to get Allan's DNA. He was placed under surveillance. The problem was that the man never threw out his trash, always taking everything with him. After 5 weeks, finally, the surveillance team got lucky. Philips threw away some trash at the post office after having lunch at the local diner, and the detectives were there. The collected DNA was enough to run tests and finally find a match. That's how they were able to link Allan to the disappearance and murder of 2 women. On February 24, 2021, he was arrested outside his home and charged with first-degree murder as well as kidnapping and sexual assault. Allan's only response was that he was innocent on all counts. In an interview with CBS News, Sergeant Wendy Kippel even admitted that Philips was shocked when she handcuffed him. As soon as news of the arrest hit the media, several people found Allan Phillips's name to be familiar. Remember that lucky guy who was rescued from the blizzard after sending a distress signal? That was him, Allan Philips. This meant that Dave Montoya, the fire chief that saved him, found him only a few minutes after Allan had got rid of Bobbie Jo's body. And then he was on the news and in the papers as the luckiest man alive. In a way, he really was lucky. He had committed such a crime and lived his whole life unpunished. Dave Montoya said he'd known Allan before the incident in the mountains. He'd worked with Philips in the mines. That night, Allan told him that he was drunk and didn't want to drive his truck down the highway for fear of being pulled over by the police. So he drove through the pass, but got stuck. As Montoya recalled, almost 40 years later, he had noticed a large scratch on Phillips's face that night. Allan said he got it when he fell into the snow. "If I had known what I know now, I probably would have left him there," Montoya said at the conclusion of his story. Police believe Phillips didn't fall in the snow. Rather, the scratch was a result of Bobbie Jo Oberholtzer hitting him in the face with a special keyring her husband had made for her. Alas, it didn't help her escape. Can you imagine how things would have turned out if his distress signal had not been noticed? Allan would have frozen there in the past, remaining unpunished for his crimes, and the case might have never been solved. In a way, it is amazing how things played out in the end. On August 31st, 2022, Allan Phillips's trial began in Fairplay, Colorado. The families of both women were present. Phillips looked nonchalant. It seemed what was going on did not concern him at all and did not arouse any emotion in him. His defense attorneys tried to cast doubt on the DNA test results and shift the blame to Jeff Oberholtzer. Nonetheless, on September 15, 2022, a Park County jury found Allan Lee Philips guilty of the murders. It took them nearly 5 hours to reach a verdict. Just over 7 weeks later, on November 7, 2022, he received 2 life sentences. Allan's daughter cried as the sentence was being pronounced. She refused to believe her father was capable of such a thing. 39 years of hell. That is how Annette Schnee's 88-year-old mother, Eileen Franklin, described her life while waiting for justice. She didn't think she would live to see the day when her daughter's killer was found. According to CBS News, Phillips intends to appeal his conviction on grounds that the DNA evidence used to charge him in the case was contaminated and mishandled. A cross now stands on the site where Bobbie Jo Oberholtzer's body was found. It is a peaceful spot surrounded by stunningly beautiful mountains, the same ones that once attracted Bobbie Jo and her husband Jeff to this area. Bobbie Jo's daughter experienced bitterness and relief when Allan was caught. She herself was already a mother by then.
When I look into my child's blue eyes, which are truly beautiful like my mom's, I see her,
Jackie Vukas Walker said. But what if these 2 beautiful women were not his only victims? That's the assumption the police are currently going on. Phillips has clearly done this several times. Perhaps one day someone will find the courage to report other abuse on his part, and then we will learn about Allan Phillips's terrible deeds that have hitherto stayed hidden. If you enjoyed my rendition of this story, make sure to press the like button and subscribe to my channel so as not to miss any of my new videos. And as always, stay safe.